Everyone, in this video, we will continue our Django REST framework tutorial by adding an authentication feature. We will learn the principles behind the JSON web tokens and how you can build an authentication feature using them. So this will be our authentication process, where when a user logs in using their valid credentials of the email and the password, a JSON web token is going to be generated for that user. The JSON web token has three parts. It has the header, which carries the token type, and the payload, which carries the user data, and finally it has the verifying signature, which is used to verify the JSON web token. The fact that it's possible to store user data in a JSON web token makes it vulnerable. That's why we should always specify an expiration time when creating a JWT. The standard approach is to have two tokens, that is the access and the refresh tokens. The access token is used to access resources and handle authorization, while the refresh token is used to retrieve a new access token. So why do we need two tokens? Remember that the access token should have a short lifespan. This means that after the access token has expired, the user has to log in again and again, and no user wants the login page to appear after every 5 minutes. That's where the refresh token comes in. It will contain essential information needed to verify the user and generate a new access token. To implement this in Django, we are going to use the simple JWT module, and we can just install it using pip. So pip install Django REST framework simple JWT. I'm going to install it, and this is the official documentation. So after installing it, we are going to register it in our main project. So in our settings file, we can register it here. So REST framework. Always remember to add the comma. After registering the framework, we need to set the default permission class. You can get that from the documentation again. So the REST framework, under the REST framework settings, you can just copy this and paste it in our settings file. Again, like I mentioned before, we have an access and refresh tokens. And luckily, the simple JWT applications comes with the endpoints for this. These are the endpoints. We have the token obtain pair view and the refresh view. The token obtain view is responsible for generating the refresh and access token, while the token refresh view is responsible for refreshing our refresh token. So we can just copy this for now. I'm going to show you how we can customize this. So in our main project, again, in our URLs, you can just paste that in and register the URLs. So we're going to add these URLs and see how this will work out. So we have these new paths or endpoints that you're going to use to generate tokens. So we can test this by running our server. I'm going to test this endpoint from my API client. I'm using Insomnia. You can either use Insomnia or Postman. Let's start with the refresh endpoint. This will be localhost port 8000 API, then token. And this endpoint will be responsible for generating our access and refresh tokens. It will only generate these tokens when provided with a valid email and password. So we can use one of our users. Let's use Django. So we can have our body, which will be in JSON format. And here we can have the email address. We can have the email address. And we can have the password, which was testing321. And we can make the post request. It should be a post request. And send it. We're getting an error. we need to have a / at the end, and that should be able to return our refresh and access tokens. Since we are authenticating our user, we are going to rename this to login. This should be our login endpoint, and this endpoint is going to be our refresh endpoint. It's going to be more or less the same as this, so we can just copy the URL, have it as such, and paste it in. It's also going to be a post request, but at the end we're going to have refresh, and in the body we're going to pass a JSON object, and here we're going to pass our refresh token, so we can have refresh. And we can use the refresh token we got from our login endpoint. So we can use this, so copy and paste it in over here. So we are getting an error. Our token is invalid or expired. So we can just log in again and try that again. So we have our refresh. We can just copy this once more. And yeah, we get a new access token. We can then use this access token to access restricted endpoints. For now, let's set a more realistic timeline for our refresh tokens so that we don't have to refresh our tokens after every minute. We can do this in our settings file. We are going to create a new settings dictionary, which is going to be simple JWT, and we can just copy this from the official documentation, where we'll have our access token lifetime and our refresh token lifetime. Let's paste that in. We are going to import this time delta from the datetime module. You can import that over here. So you can see that the refresh token lifetime is usually more. We've set the day to 1, but the access token lifetime is usually shorter. We've set it to 5 minutes. Let's set it to 10. So this means that our access token will expire after 10 minutes. So now that we have our login and refresh endpoints, let's create some protected views. I'm going to create a simple view for now. In the coming videos, we will have endpoints that will allow users to set favorite players, and we can't have our unauthenticated users setting players as favorites. So let's create that simple view set for now. So in our users view set, we are going to import API view from the REST framework. So from the REST framework .views, import API view. We are also going to need the is authenticated permission, and that will just check if our user is authenticated or not. So from the REST framework .permissions, import is authenticated. We can start by creating a protected view. So class protected view, and this should inherit from API view. And then we're going to set the permission classes. It's a list, so it's going to be is authenticated. Eventually, we're going to see how to create custom permission classes. But for now, let's create our get method. So def get. This is going to take self and request. Then this method, we're going to return response. We're going to return response. Our data is going to be a dictionary of message. This is a private view. So it's going to return that message. This is a private view. Then we're also going to have our status. Status is equals to status .http200. The public view is going to be very similar to this, so we can just copy this one and paste it in. This is going to be public view. We're going to remove the permission class. And the message is going to say this is a public view. This just means that any user can access this endpoint, whether or not they are authenticated. So we are going to register these views in our URLs, in our main projects directory where we have our URLs. We are going to import them. So that's from our API .viewsets .user viewsets import public API view and protected view. We can create the endpoints for that. So path, where we have our API. When a user navigates to protected, here we are going to have our protected view. Then as view, then we're going to specify the name, which will be equals to protected view. Let's have an underscore over here for consistency. Our public view is going to be more or less the same as the protected view. So you can just copy this and paste it in. So API and public, this is going to be public, and our view is going to be the public view. The name is going to be public view. Yeah. And we can then navigate to these URLs and see this in action. So we are going to create new endpoints for that. Let's have, this is going to be the private or protected. The other one is going to be public. Let's start with the public view, and we can navigate to that endpoint. And you can see the message we declared. This is a public view. And let's try the same thing for our private view. So we can just copy the URL. And this is going to be protected. Protected. So you can see we are getting an unauthorized error, which is a 441 response code. Detailed authentication credentials were not provided. So to authenticate our user, we need to pass the bearer token. So under the auth column, go to bearer token, and here we can pass our access token. So let's refresh our token once again. Where we have our refresh token, let's refresh it and copy the new access token. Then in our private view, where we have our bearer token, let's paste in the token. And you can see we are getting a valid response message. This is a private view. So that has worked. So at the moment, everything is working correctly, but there is one thing I want to show you, and that will be to customize our token obtain view. Because at the moment, when we navigate to our login view, which is responsible for generating our tokens, the response only contains the refresh and access tokens. But I want us to include the user data in this endpoint. So to do that, we're going to have to create a new serializer in our serializers, where we have our users. We can create a new serializer, and let's call it the login serializer. The login serializer is going to extend the token obtain pair serializer from the simple JWT framework. So I can just import that, and that's from the REST framework, simple JWT.serializers import token obtain pair serializer. So our serializer is going to extend that token obtain pair serializer. The first thing to do is going to be to validate our user credentials, and we can do that by overriding the parent's validate method. So validate, and this will take self and attributes. So we can then run the parents validate method using the super function. So super dot validate, and this method is going to take our attributes. So when we run this function, it's going to check the user's credentials. If the credentials are accurate, it's going to return our user object. So we are going to store this in a variable. Let's call it data. And the next step is to generate the token for our authenticated user. So we can do that using self.get token and passing our user, which is equal to self.user. We can then store this in a variable called refresh. So this will hold our refresh token. And remember that the aim of this serializer is to include our user data to the output. So we are going to need to serialize our user data, and we can use that using our user serializer over here, which is specified earlier on. So we can have user serializer, which is going to take our self.user variable and get its data. Then we can store this in a variable called user. So we need to include this in our data object. So we can have data refresh is equals to string refresh. We are also going to need our user object, so user. Then we are also going to need to include our access token, and that is held in our refresh variable. So we have data access is equals to string and going to be refresh dot access token. After all that is done, we want to return our data. Before returning our data, I want to update the last login attribute of our user, and we can do that using the update last login function from Django. We can import that. So from Django .contrib .auth .models import update last login. So before returning our data, we just need to run this function update last login. It's a signal, so it usually has a sender and our user object. For now, we're going to have the sender as none and specify our user object as self.user. So with that, our login serializer is ready, and we just need to create a view for that. So in our user view set, let's create a view. We're going to call it login view. So class login view, and this is going to be similar to the register view set. So that is going to be viewsets dot viewset. Since we are going to be making a post request with our user data, we are going to define a create action. So def create. We talked about this in our previous tutorial. So self, this is going to take self request. So we're going to take args and quags. For now, I'm going to pass because we need to import our serializer. So we are going to import the login serializer, and in our login view, specify the serializer class. We're also going to need to set our allowed method names. So HTTP method names. We are only going to need the post request. So we are going to initialize our serializer. So serializer is equals to self dot serializer class, and that is going to take our request data. So data is equals to request dot data. This data is going to come in JSON format from our post requests. Then we're also going to check if our serializer is valid or not. So it's valid. If it's invalid, raise an exception. which is equals to true. I'm going to put this in a try block. So if we get an error, for example, if a token is invalid, so you can have that except token error. We are going to need to import this token error. Let's import it. It's from the REST framework simple JWT. So from REST framework simple JWT dot exceptions, import token error. We're also going to need the invalid token. So if you get a token error, we're going to raise an invalid token error. For now, I'm just going to pass E. So if everything works well, if our serializer is valid, our user is authenticated, we are going to return a valid response. So return response. We've imported our response. Yeah, we did import it. And this is going to have our data, which is held in our serializer. So we'll have serializer dot validated data. We are also going to have a 200 status code, and with that our login view is ready. Let's register it in our roots. So we are going to import that. Where we have our user view sets, let's import our login view. So here we have roots dot register. We have our auth. We have our auth underscore login. Our login view is going to handle that logic. Specify the base name as login. So we have our register view and we have our login view. Our view set is ready and our serializer is ready. Our serializer should return the refresh token, the access token, and a bit of our user data. And it should also update our last login. So in our login view, replace this using API.auth.login. Since it's a post request, we're going to need the / at the end. We have our JSON data, which is our email and password. So we can test this. And yeah, it works. We have our refresh token and our access token and our user data. So for now, in our URLs file, now we're going to remove this because our login view handles our token generation. So I can just clean that up a little bit. What happens if a user passes invalid credentials? Let's say that they pass an invalid password. Let's try changing this value. You can see we are getting an error. No active account found with the given credentials. So testing 3, 2, 1. So that is working correctly. We can test the access token by going to our private view and changing our bearer token. So you can just paste that in. You can see we are getting a valid response. Message, this is a private view. So in the next video, we are going to improve on this. We are going to add endpoints that will allow users to mark favorite players. That is going to be interesting, as we are going to have to create new relationships between our player model and user model. We're also going to learn how to create object level permissions, and this will ensure that a user can't modify the favorite players of another user. So we are going to see this in our next video. In this video, we've learned how to authenticate users using JSON Web Tokens and how to create protected views. If you found this video useful, consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing for similar content. Thank you for watching.